There's nobody actively making the calls to change and being the driver for the change and leading people.
Leadership is helping other people do what they want to do already, but haven't figured out how. I'm not saying what's something you can do to help fix the environment. It is not to fix the world. This is for you to bring about emotions that you sound like you really like having in your life.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of Compassiviste Dialogues, the podcast where we discuss social issues, climate issues, and the intersection of everything that matters on our planet. I have Josh Spodek with me again. After the last conversation we had, we decided to continue into something a little deeper and a little more aligned to what we're doing together. So I will first ask Josh to please reintroduce yourself for the people who did not see you here last time and tell us a little about what you're doing so I can start asking you all the exciting questions.
Sure. Joshua Spodek, and I host the This Sustainable Life podcast. I'm working on a book that will come out soon on sustainability leadership. My background, I'll give the very quick version, is got a PhD in physics, helped launch a satellite, still orbiting the Earth, taking data. Left academia to start my first company. We had its ups and downs, went back to business school, learned leadership, which I didn't expect to. And then when I started connecting with environmental issues, if you asked me a while ago, I would have said what one person does can't possibly matter. Only governments and corporations can make a difference on the scale we need. They cause the problem, they should solve it. But most of all, I expected that acting more sustainably would cause deprivation and sacrifice, burden, chore. And the more that I acted, completely contrary to my expectations, the better it made my life. Why did I think that way? So I thought, culture seems to have made me think one way. And missing from all of sustainability, I found, was leadership. That is my definition of leadership is helping other people do what they want to do already, but haven't figured out how. And I think most people don't want to pollute as much as they are. We got to change our culture. And so I'm working on sustainability leadership. How do we help people do what they want to do, but haven't figured out how?
Okay. Interesting you mentioned that, because one of the reasons we are here in this seat again is I was doing a little reading on you, and I noticed, just like myself, you're not really out there in the media so much, and you're not really out there doing the things that really got me thinking about the same things you say. What can I do to make a difference? And I thought to myself, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to start a movement, and I'm going to get people to come together and try to make a difference, because I also got to the conclusion that, I cannot sit back and wait for governments and massive corporations to make decisions that affect me, when I should be able to have a say in those. And so I decided I should do something. The collective of people should come together and do something about it. And so I started noticing, coming into the space, coming from as an outsider, I never had social media. I never really interacted with the world in that way. And coming into this, I started noticing a lot of the people who are brand names of sustainability, who are big names in sustainability, they're really busy with their teams becoming famous for being sustainability leaders. They're just trying to make a name for themselves as sustainability leaders. They're not really in the space of doing the work. So it started bothering me that a lot of people are there, promoting things like investment, these green investment bonds, and so many things that are just a continuous promotion of the capitalism that got us here, instead of trying to make a difference or trying to make a change. And what got us to this episode really is, I look at what you're doing, and it's not really like that. You're not really out there trying to do that either, although you have all the credentials. I mean, you have the academia, background, you have the business background, you have the wealth to promote yourself in that way. I mean, media at the end of the day is about money. You have enough, you throw enough money at media, you become famous. That's how it works. And you haven't really done any of that. What you are doing is touching individuals and showing by record of yourself that this is a possibility. And this is how the possibility can be manifested because you've done it and you're really doing it in that the old school way. And the old school way for me is I always go back into the spiritual aspect of it is, you know, the old leaders didn't sit back and tell people how it should be done and complain and point fingers and just sit back and sip wine. What they did is get into the action and actually lead the change and lead the revolution and lead the difference. And that's exactly what you're doing here. You're leading a revolution with the ways that you are positioning yourself on your website and other spaces to get people to change. So what are your thoughts about how the sustainability issue is moving forward and how you even say that we don't have sustainability leaders today, which I take it to mean that. I take it to mean there's nobody actively making the calls to change and being the driver for the change and leading people.
We said a lot, and I made some notes while you're talking, so I'll go through a couple things.
Sure.
And hopefully I don't cover too much. All right, for one thing about governments and corporations, you said you're not going to wait for them to act. They got there through a system that works for them. They're not going to change unless we lead them to change. And most people, virtually everyone that I know, spends tens of thousands of dollars a year filling their gas tank, buying airplane tickets, heating their homes, air conditioning their homes, and they're funding governments and corporations to keep doing what they're doing. And so they can say, well, I'll protest this and I'll point fingers over there. But ultimately, all of that stuff, even a vote every 4 years, even more often, even if they run for office, that's very small compared to how much they're funding the opposition. If we want them to change, it is not going to come from them acting first. Governments and corporations acting, that's not the beginning of the marathon. That's the end of the marathon. Now it's the beginning of another marathon. That marathon will be running downhill or with a tailwind. But the first one is we have to lead them to change, and we have to stop ourselves from funding them. It's like, I mean, most people spend tens of thousands of dollars a year funding them, and corporations spend a lot more than that. So next, I find that a lot of people see that there's stages that people go through on understanding our environmental issues. So at the one extreme, there are some people, a vanishingly small amount, that don't know that there are issues. Then people see that there are issues, then people act, and then they act a bit more, then they act a bit more. But at each stage, we lose more and more people. So very few people are seriously devoting significant portions of their lives to this. A very small number eventually reach the point where they realize that we have to change our culture. That if I could snap my fingers and magically put everything back to pre-industrial levels, so all the extinct animals are back, all the greenhouse levels are where they were, all the pollution's gone, but we kept our culture, we'd come right back here again soon enough. We have to change our culture, but with rare exception, to the tune of like a few people out of billions, virtually everyone at that stage says, well, changing culture is too hard. I'm not going to work on that. Let me take a step back and I'll start a company. I'll get someone elected. I'll do some protests. I'll get some legislation going. I'll make some technology more efficient or a market more efficient. And they don't realize that if you don't change the culture, if you keep the mission and strategy, all the tactics in the world will keep serving that mission and strategy. That means that if you make a polluting system more efficient, you pollute more efficiently. You may reduce it in one little area, but overall the whole system, people will, if you make a company more efficient, it becomes more profitable, but let's say it's less polluting, but it reinvest those profits into more things. And so maybe there'll be less exhaust coming out of a tailpipe, but there'll be more plastic and more other things, more mining and more things like that. Ultimately, we have to change our culture. And that's leadership. You can't manage into a new culture. You have to lead into a new culture. So leadership, there's a big divide between, there's a lot of overlap between management and leadership, but management without leadership, you get the DMV, which if you just want a license, great, go to the DMV. But if you want to change things, management alone will not do it. Now, leadership without management, you get dreamers, and that won't get you, that won't finish the job. but management with leadership, which we do not have. We have management. So management would be incentives, measurable things, legislation, telling people what to do, facts, numbers, very, very important, critically important. Leadership, role models, a vision for a future. Leaders need integrity, credibility, relevant experience. That means the value, from a manager's standpoint, one person doing something, you measure the output and say, well, what does that compare to the whole world? Well, divided by 8 billion, it's like nothing. So individual action is pointless from a manager's perspective. From a leadership perspective, how do you get to Carnegie Hall? You have to practice your scales. No one goes to Carnegie Hall to see someone play scales. And yet the people who play Carnegie Hall play the most number of scales. What are the scales? The scales are at least trying to live sustainably. So you have to do these things to learn that the challenges are not, is it possible for me to turn my thermostat down in the winter or the air conditioning down in the summer? Of course it's possible. The question is how you handle it. What do you do about it? So that's where the credibility and integrity comes from. You cannot lead another person to live by values that you live the opposite of. So that's integrity. That's credibility. You can manage without integrity. You can manage without credibility, without character, without honor. But I don't think you can lead that way. And so you have to do these things in order to have credibility. If you read Letter from Birmingham Jail, by today's standards, so that was written by Martin Luther King as he was put in jail for nonviolent civil disobedience. By today's standards, they'd say Martin Luther King could be much more effective outside of jail. He shouldn't go to jail. Others should, but he shouldn't. Luckily, no one told him that. And it's one of the most amazing documents I've ever read. Of course, he could have been more productive outside of prison, outside of jail, but he had to do what he was asking other people to do. And this is all throughout history. I mean, Gandhi wasn't,
Yes.
So also role models is another big example. Dr. King and Gandhi both represented, Gandhi was he's from the colony. Dr. King was the oppressed. Today, you could say we're the oppressed because we have to, our kids have asthma and we're going to be underwater, our cities are going to be underwater, but we're also on the other side of it. We're also flying around. We're also buying the SUVs. We're also using disposable diapers and all these other things that pollute. So we need role models who came from the class that could have benefited and yet chose not to. So Oskar Schindler is one that is like most people know about. He didn't do what he did to make quarterly numbers. He didn't do that to do well by doing good or some equivalent of greenwashing. He did it because he felt it was right. He took it at personal risk. And he's going up against Nazis. We don't have to go up against, he actually was a card-carrying member of the Nazi Party, as I understand. But the big example for me is Robert Carter III. Did I talk about him last time?
No.
Robert Carter III in 1791 began the process of freeing his slaves. He was a Virginia slaveholder. And that was legally, he actually had to wait for the law to change for him to free his slaves. He couldn't. His neighbors hated him. This was not doing something to look good. He looked at his values and asked what he believed was right. And he was lowering his net value and his net worth. So he was giving away slaves, freeing his slaves, giving them land. And it was the largest freeing of slaves of anyone. It was something like 500 slaves. He was actually a classmate of Thomas Jefferson.
Yes.
Who famously, when I heard they were taking down his statues, I'm like, wait a minute here. Declaration of Independence. This guy wrote the best words of freedom among the most eloquent speakers on freedom ever. And then I read how he wrote in the Notes of State of Virginia that he thought that Africans mated with orangutans. Now, this is not, there's no basis for this. This is made up. This is someone rationalizing and justifying. He was corrupted by owning slaves and he didn't free them. Had he freed them, is it possible that he could have influenced the Constitution to have the Constitution be a more perfect union, to be more free? As it was, by comparison, there's Robert Carter III, there's Harriet Tubman, who when she became free, could have laid low. And that was the safe thing for her to do. But she went back into slave territory to free more slaves. 13 trips she made into slave territory. Now she saved 70 people. Now compared to the 3 million slaves, that's negligible. Now you could say, well, it's valuable for those 70, but she could have died. If we say individual action doesn't matter, what did she know that we don't? Because she put her life on the line and we didn't. We're not the people who say what one person does doesn't matter. Well, it wasn't just her. She was part of the Underground Railroad. She helped them, they helped her as a community. And collectively, the Underground Railroad saved like 100,000 people. But even that's small compared to 3 million. But that was part of a global abolition movement that helped create, and it anti-slavery politics in the US that led to a president being elected on a platform anti-slavery, which led to the 13th Amendment, which made slavery illegal. You can quibble about whether, not quibble, I mean, there are big loopholes in it, the prison industrial complex, for example, but it took one of the most divisive issues in American history and made it one of the most uniting. That I'm not aware of any politician running on repealing the 13th Amendment. Now, along the way, Harriet Tubman was one of many, many people who did things that anyone else could have said, what one person does doesn't matter. What you're doing, there's no point. And many people lived long, healthy lives and died before their actions of starting an anti-slavery group or doing this act here, this act there, that seemed like it may have been pointless in 1830, 1840, 1850, 1860. But those who saw the movie Lincoln know that the House vote on the 13th Amendment, that morning they didn't know if it would pass. And that was with Lincoln throwing everything he had and the whole party throwing everything that they had at it. Mm-hmm. If any one of those people that looked like at the time what they were doing might have been not worth it, if any one of them hadn't done it, it's possible it wouldn't have passed. It's possible the Civil War could have ended with all the slaves freed, say the Emancipation, well, that didn't free all the slaves because there's the border states, but say the Emancipation Proclamation freed all the slaves. But without the 13th Amendment, the slave states could have legally restarted slavery.
Yes.
So all those things mattered. Because it was that close. Now, if it was a true democratic vote, the slaves would have been able to vote, but the slave owners kept the 3 million, or by that point, 4 million slaves unable to vote. So it was a travesty of democracy. But that's what happens when they have all that power, funded by all the people buying the cotton, buying all the sugar, mm-hmm, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And now, by contrast, what if there had been more people acting, even if they were all doing stuff that wouldn't have seemed like it wouldn't have mattered? There might not have been, it would have been maybe a stronger 13th Amendment, or there might not have been a civil war, it might have ended sooner. But imagine Robert Carter III had been able to influence Thomas Jefferson, or George Washington, another Virginia slaveholder president who didn't free his slaves until after he died. But those two could have influenced the Constitution. So we need a lot more Harriet Tubmans and Robert Carter III's who could say, governments and corporations, they should do something, but they did it. And we don't need so many Thomas Jeffersons who say, let's have freedom, but it's a little hard for me to change myself. Because I think most of us, if we could go back and talk to him, we'd say, I think it's worth it for you to free your slaves. Look at Robert Carter III. So now I'm laying low for very, very strategic reasons. I just talked to you, this is one of the most I've spoken about abolitionism. Abolitionism to me is a role model movement of mm-hmm. a culture of slavery that existed since before writing. Some of the earliest records we have are of slavery, the Code of Hammurabi and stuff like that. So around for at least 10,000 years. And in the course of a couple human lifetimes, it became illegal everywhere. Now it still exists. There are huge problems with slavery still today, but it's illegal everywhere. Mm-hmm. So that tells me that it's possible for humans to change culture on the timescales that we need, on the global scale that we need. And there are other examples as well of change on the national and empire level that were deliberately caused by individuals or small groups of people. Now, we talked last time about the Spodek method. And I think that's what we're going to talk about more later, is that it's a technique sort of like nonviolent civil disobedience for other movements that are being used to some degree in sustainability, but that when you're being oppressed by someone and they're breaking their own values, nonviolent civil disobedience is very helpful because it shows them doing something that they themselves think is wrong. When we ourselves are the ones doing it, we need a different technique. So the Spodek method acts on people who are on both sides and we're twisted up inside. So the podcast is my top-down approach, which is working with leaders, CEOs, elected officials on all over the political spectrum, athletes, winners of Super Bowl and gold medals and Pulitzer Prize winners. And the bottom-up approach is to do the workshops that I do, which is to teach people the Spodek method and how to teach it to others and how to teach it to others. And there my role model is things like CrossFit or Weight Watchers or Alcoholics Anonymous, where someone can go attend for a while. And if you get the training, you can start your own gym or your own group, and people go through dramatic changes. Now, there are differences. I'm not trying to be exactly CrossFit. I'm not trying to be exactly Weight Watchers or AA. But those things have grown to hundreds of millions of members in hundreds of countries through people. If it's CrossFit, they go to a gym, they like it. Eventually, this gym is too crowded. I'll start my own. And then they start their own, and so forth. Now, there's a lot of things that ultimately, and by the way, so I summarized the strategy in top down, bottom up, everywhere, all at once, starting here and now with me and you. So it's not any one thing, it's all of these things. Past generations could have taken their time, and I don't want to push a system faster than it can be pushed because then it will tend to resist. But as we'll see, people really like the change when it comes from inside, when it comes from intrinsic motivation, when it's led rather than managed and just scolded. And the book covers some of the things that I talked about: abolitionism, slavery. I also talk a lot about addiction. Now, when I first started connecting abolitionism, slavery, and pollution, depletion, and the numbers of deaths today is way higher. 9 million people a year die today from just breathing polluted air. That's not in factories, that's just breathing polluted air. That's according to the Lancet. That's every year. It took the Atlantic slave trade centuries to reach what we do every year, and that's just one way people die, and it's small compared to what's predicted. But when I first started talking about this, a month later, George Floyd was killed. And I did not see a large clamoring for what does this straight white man have to say about these issues? And so I had to, and now I was saying something that I don't think had been said before, but people had said to me, the best thing you can do is to shut up and listen. And so I had to figure out, how do I say something new that's different that no one's heard before in a way that they say, let me keep turning the pages and see what more is here. And so I don't want to come out with this. There's a lot I had to work through, and I'm still working through, to say it in a way that's meaningful to people, that's attractive to people, that leads people to want to change, to want to be like Robert Carter III and Harriet Tubman, not so much like Thomas Jefferson. Well, like him in one way, but actually to have integrity throughout their whole lives, and not to just say, well, other people should, but I have no choice. The plane was going to fly anyway, and all that sort of rationalization and justification. After the book comes out, and I talk about these things comprehensively and hopefully in a way that people want to hear and want more, I think my voice will come out more. Now, have I talked too much? There's one last piece.
Go ahead. I'm listening.
I had Derek Sivers on my podcast. And for people who don't know, he's a big writer. He's got some really awesome TED Talks. And he asked me, why did you want me on the podcast so much? Because I don't do anything on sustainability. And I said, my strategy is to bring leaders from lots of areas, not just sustainability. In fact, I'm generally not looking for people in sustainability if they're not leaders on a big scale. People are constantly coming to me and saying, my cousin is doing this composting thing. It's great. I'd rather have a movie star who knows nothing about sustainability, because I know that the Spodek method will work with that person. And I lost my train of thought. I was saying that who's on the podcast?
Writer.
Let me see my note. Oh, yeah, Derek Sivers. So yes, I said, why did I want him on? Because he's a leader. And he said, Josh, I'm not a leader. I'm an explorer. And the way he put it was, he likes to explore the frontier of things, what's possible for humans. And up until then, I generally thought of myself as a leader, someone who wants to help lead people. And I do still consider myself a leader, but also an explorer. I'm exploring the frontier. So I keep taking these steps to live more sustainably. And each step, when people hear that I don't have an account with Con Ed, with the electrical supplier here, because I unplugged my apartment from the grid. And people could see I have this battery here that I charge on the roof. And actually, after we record, I'm going to go up to the roof to charge it. And that sounds extreme to a lot of people. Well, it's not extreme when you consider that not one human being lived with an electric grid up until about a century ago. And many people in the world don't have electric grids. And when you think of how many people are dying for these things, if you do something and it kills people and you don't want to kill people, you got to stop doing that thing. That's not that extreme. But I know that for most people it looks extreme, but it's not extreme compared to the last thing I did before that and the last thing before that. I'm taking all these little baby steps. Mindset shift followed by continual improvement. And people say, Josh, at one point you unplugged your fridge. You got to show people how they can live without a refrigerator so they can do that. Well, I could have stopped at that point exploring and said, set up a thing, here's how to live without a refrigerator. Virtually all of your ancestors did so. Food waste will drop, food quality will increase, costs will go down. It's possible, but then I wouldn't have taken the next step of unplugging my apartment. And if I'd stopped at that point and said, here's how to unplug your apartment, I would not take the next step to cancel my account with the grid. Then I wouldn't have been able to do all these future things. So as an explorer and leader, I'm partly discovering the frontier. And if I stopped at any point, ultimately we have to change culture and find the possibilities and do the things that other people don't. I have to find out what's possible, because most people say, I'm like many steps into what people have been telling me is impossible. And yet I'm doing it. And then they would say, well, it's impossible to enjoy your life that way. It's obviously going to make your life worse. I'm like, I'm having a pretty good time. I'm pretty healthy. And my relationships are, and so it's, so I haven't stopped. I'm leaving in my wake, what an explorer often leaves in their wake is the possibility of others, the entrepreneurs saying, here, there's demand for lowering your impact, your footprint on the earth. Here's some things that you can do, and I'll help them, but it's not going to stop me from finding out what's next, what's more possible, what's beyond. Because I haven't hit the limit yet. The more I do, the more I find there is to do. But the entrepreneurs out there might look at this situation, and I'm happy to work with them. Please contact me. One of the big things now is the growing these workshops. People love the experience that they're going through. It's a serious gut check when people realize, people cry when they realize, oh my God, all these stories I've been telling myself to keep doing these things that pollute, they're seriously hurting people. They're lies. These stories I've been lying to myself. And people cry at that point, but they also cry when they look forward and they say, I can be like Harriet Tubman. That's there. My individual action enables me to lead way more people to achieve much more change than I could have on my own. That's part of the reason why I've been laying low. Also, I can't stand social media. Well, social media, I think, is like that. It's doof. It's so addictive, and that feeds the culture that I think we have to change.
It's a system. Yeah, and that was a lot, but I'm going to touch on two quick issues there. One, you name some people, and for a lot of I've done this. I've spoken with people, and I've mentioned names. I've mentioned Dr. King. I've mentioned Gandhi. I've mentioned the big names we all mention, right? Because those are the people of history. And really, if you really want to stretch it, there's very few hundreds of people that you can mention and say these were game changers. And third, the issue I'm facing here is you look at a person like Jesus, and it took centuries for the Jesus method, so to speak, to infiltrate from retelling his story, publishing a book, the Bible, and going through the Catholic Church, going through all the capitalism of the time, so to speak, and growing this message through all of its atrocities and disasters, and reaching the personal level of the spiritual person today. So you don't have to be a Catholic or an Orthodox or any kind of Christian by membership to relate to Jesus or understand Jesus or love Jesus or want to feel that I'm going to make decisions in that way with compassion leading the way. So you could be a Mother Teresa and not necessarily be related to a certain organization. Now you go to another story like Gandhi, and here you have a person who in that same couple of decades of his own lifetime was able to see a vision, implement the mission, and reach the target goal within a lifetime. And there are preset goals for Gandhi in a sense, whereas there are no preset goals for Jesus. Jesus just came in with an ideology that would make the world kinder, harmonious, a better place to live in. And Gandhi came and said, I'm going to touch on this one issue. This one issue is, say, the freedom of my people. Harriet Tubman said, I'm free. I could live up north now, and I could start a new career and do well for myself even. But I have this one issue in my mind. I'm going to tackle this one issue. And every one of her trips that went back, and every one of the 70 people she helped, was part and parcel of that goal that she had set herself. So in a space of visionaries and implementers, I feel there are the Jesus types who come in and bring an ideology for change. And then there are the implementers, the Gandhi types, who actually come in with a very narrow scope of making a specific difference. Now, bringing all of this together, because I think in the matter of, as you put it, changing culture, you need a new visionary voice for what this new culture can look like. What does it look like when we love each other? What does it look like when we love the whole world? What does it look like when we want to live in a harmonious world? And we need an implementational vision like the Gandhi style or the Harriet Tubman style that says, hey, how do I get from point A to B? Just like from unplugging your fridge to unplugging your whole, going off grid. So that's steps to implementation. And I think the embodiment of one person as a leader in all of these spaces is going to be very difficult because you mentioned you in the space of being in the frontier. And as you're moving along, what ends up happening is I'm following, I'm watching, I'm learning, but it will probably be after you pass away and the stories of you are told, like Harriet Tubman, that you will be inspiration enough for people to say, I want to be Josh Spodek. Do you remember Josh Spodek? He did such and such and such. But as you're crossing these frontiers, you cannot be the inspiration unless you can bring those two spaces together. And as you say, be in that space of leadership, which is why I really wanted to have more conversations with you, because I think this is so much more important to understand the vision and the views of people who recognize that not only do we have to lead, and not only do we have to understand the problems and create the solutions, because these are creational aspects, these are new aspects, but we can take from the past and we can take from history, but we also need to implement them, and we also need to be in the battlefield. And you're doing all of this at the same time, which is, in a sense, what I'm trying to do as well. I'm trying to do all of this at the same time. I'm trying to come out and say, I changed my life. This is my history. A lot of people can go online. There are articles, there are different spaces where you can see my history and how I've made that transition from exactly what you said, being at the forefront of that industry to coming around and fighting it and rebelling against it. So can we achieve? That's what the Spodek method is about.
Yeah, it's not just doing things. It's very easy to look at my profile now because the book is not out yet and say, oh, he just figured out some things that work well for himself, and he hopes that maybe a couple other billion people do something like that. And that's a fair reading of what's out there now, but that is not the strategy at all.
Right.
When we do the Spodek, let's do it. And then
let's do it. Yeah.
Gandhi without civil disobedience, or Dr. King without civil disobedience, that's a tactic that enables a strategy to work, to fulfill a mission. Now, that tactic doesn't work. It's of limited application here. Mm-hmm. But with things that actually work, then yeah, there's a lot you can do. So,
but we need to commit to those things to work. So a good example is you go on a lot of social media spaces and you'll see people, Nestle is a bad company because Nestle produces plastic bottles. Well, okay, fine. Nestle is a bad company. I'm not going to argue with you, but I'm going to tell you this. If you and everybody in your neighborhood stop buying those Nestle plastic bottles, Walmart is going to call Nestle and say, hey, those 2 truckloads of water bottles you dropped off last week, they didn't sell. You need to come pick them up. And so Nestle is going to say, hey, now that's a problem, and
there's something upstream of there that most people view action on sustainability as deprivation, sacrifice, it's work. It's something, and they think that if they follow that path to where they think it leads, it's oftentimes they'll say something like back to the Stone Age, or something about a Mad Max apocalypse, or something like, mothers are going to die in childbirth, and 30 is going to be old age again. And so they'll take a step or two, but if their vision of where that path leads is a dystopia, they will either consciously stop or subconsciously sabotage themselves and everyone around them from doing things. So that vision of what can people imagine a world in which everyone is sustainable and they like it? If that vision isn't there, what you're talking about, they'll take a step or two, but then not only will they not take a further step, they'll think you're an idiot.
Yes.
Do you realize where you're taking us? You don't realize it, and I do. So you're a stupid fool, and I'm not going to listen to you, and I'm going to keep buying the Nestle stuff and some scientist, and I'll have some rationalization, justification. Right. Someone will fix it.
And some scientists will come around and say,
care.
I fixed it.
It's not that people don't care. It's not that people don't think that they want a clean world. It's something about these pieces of leadership that are not a part of management, a vision for a future, and to give them a way to act on intrinsic motivation, that to see that it can lead to something, a brighter future. But if you don't expose people's visions of a dystopia, you can tell them to avoid straws all you want. You can tell them that Nestle might change if enough people change. But then they think, okay, so let's see, Nestle goes out of business, everyone goes out of business, recession, depression, I lose my job. Okay, hospitals close, we don't have any infrastructure, the buildings crumble. There's going to be wars. Everyone dies. By contrast, I get a bottle of water. I like the bottle of water.
Mm-hmm.
Managers don't have to worry about that. They can say, do what I tell you to do, and we're going to tax this stuff, and the incentives will get things to change for you.
Mm-hmm.
But people will resist that. Then you get like the prohibition situation, which is very different than the 13th Amendment situation.
Yes.
So if we don't lead and we only manage, people don't join together. People don't love what they're doing.
Exactly. And that's why we need these kind of methods that bring all of that together, which is what I really am trying to champion in a sense, because like you say, in your words, management without leadership won't work.
It's DMV. Yeah. If you don't want to change anything, you just want to do the same thing over and over and over and over again, go for it. And you don't really want a leader in the DMV. That's something you don't want. I mean, I think I just want a license. I'm done.
Yes.
But if you want to, in civil rights movements, you're going to want a leader, someone who can, a lot of people when they hear leader, they think authoritarian or telling people what to do.
Yes.
That's not my definition of leadership. It's support. The leader's is like the person supporting everyone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to start the Spodek method with you, and then we'll talk about it afterward.
Let's do it.
So I think I know the answer to the first question. Is the environment something that matters to you enough to have acted on in some way?
Yes.
Okay.
It is.
When you think about the environment, if I were to say, draw a picture of the environment from memory, do you have any moments in the environment that are quintessential moments for you? Something, and it's different for everyone because different people grew up in different contexts. Is there like a quintessential moment of you in the environment? So there's no motors around, you're not burning any fossil fuels. It's just you in nature. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, a few things.
Do you mind sharing?
Sure. What comes to mind? One of the things that comes to mind is the beach and the tranquility and the peace at the shore. Not so much the boats and the harbor and the jet skis and the cars and all of those things, but more so just being a child playing on the beach, and sometimes people coming around with horses because we lived by the beach, and back then there were camels or horses, and you'd see them in those spaces, and there was this call about the space, and there was this very special. I say this often to people. There was a special sound that I used to love, and it was the sound of the water without the noise pollution around it. And it sounds very different than when I go to beaches today in different parts of the world, and I notice it's not the same. I mean, even the sirens and other things that just come into that space, they pollute nature for me in a sense. And the same thing with mountains. When you go for hikes and you go on a hike in a secluded area. So I was in Ecuador when I left Toronto in 2016. My first stop was Ecuador, and when I was there, I went hiking, and there are places outside, populated city areas outside Quito, and it was just so peaceful, and you could relate to so many sounds that are natural. And for me, the environment is really that connection with nature in a harmonious sound, because I create music and I love sound, and it speaks to me in a sense. And I don't get that when I'm in cities, because the sound is very different. You do get there are famous artists. I remember I was seeing a bit on YouTube where, I don't know if it was a Billie Eilish song or something in the top of the charts, where the sound came from a clicking from some stop sign or something like that, and you get all these sounds going into your mind, but to me they're fabricated sounds. They're not natural, and I love those natural sounds of the wave, of the rocks tumbling and things like that. So nature to me is a few different things, but really about sound.
I want to go back to, you talked about a couple different environments, and let's go with the beach because you said it first. And now, if I think of a beach today, traffic and it's a lot of people, and you look like you might be old enough that was, and I think from what you said, that wasn't the case at some time. Is there a specific beach, and are you with your family? Are you on your own?
With family. And yes, it was a specific beach. So I was born and I was raised in Dubai in my younger years.
Mhm.
And there's a place, very famous landmark, which is Burj Al Arab Hotel, the first 7-star hotel in the world that was built a little bit in the water. And it's one of those pictures you see everywhere when you look at Dubai today. And that wasn't there. And in the space where that was this little chalet type hotel that used to rent out its chalets beachside. And we lived close to that area on the water. If you went to that area, you saw a few cars, you saw the hotel. It used to be called the Chicago Beach Hotel. I don't even, why it was called Chicago Beach,
Yeah.
but it was called Chicago Beach. So that was the name of the independent hotel. Now we lived, 5 minutes away from there. When you went to the water, there was no street, there was no pavement. It was just sand. And you just continued on the sand until you reached beach sand. And that's where the water was. And you just played there as children. That's where it was. That was the specific beach I'm speaking of.
And they're horses and camels. Can you tell me about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Because,
Are they
well,
wild?
see, some were because, well, not the horses, but the camels. And the thing is, back then in Dubai, we're talking, 40 years ago. And so back then, there were no streets that stretched that far. I mean, even some of the royal members, they had their beach palaces, which were outside of the city, very far away from the city of Dubai, for example, that were out there. It was a trek to get to those spaces. And the city was much further. Now, those spaces are in the middle of the city. They're in the heart of the city. There's a bustling downtown, on the strip of land that we used to live on, that was a sandy road that led to our house.
Mhm.
And so it's changed so much. It's tremendously changed. And the horses and the camels, when you went outside of the city, and this is before they started putting the fences up against the highways and all the streets, there were camels, and they would sometimes roam around, and they would, they would pass by you, so you'd see them. And especially when you drove from, say, Dubai to another city, to Abu Dhabi or LA, you would definitely see camels crossing when you made those treks. And horses, people from Dubai love horses. They have the world's largest horse racing championships in Dubai. And a lot of people have stables of horses and for racing and riding. A lot of people ride here. Back then, on the weekends, you would find a lot of people grabbing their horse and jumping on it and coming out of their homes by the water and just riding around that area and meeting neighbors and, stopping and talking and petting each other's horses. And it was very normal for something like that to happen. Today, people may honk at each other saying, "Oh, I see you, neighbor," as they drive by on the strip right by the water. And that's really the difference.
Isolation now. So,
And
well,
the infrastructure
I don't want to
change.
go in the direction of today. Let's go back
Right.
to you out there in
Right.
nature. And I mean, you described as peaceful, calm, if I remember right. What emotions, can you name some of the emotions you felt when you were out there as a kid?
Happy, because I didn't have to do homework when I was at the beach. Happy was one. And there was a sense of security, not in the sense of being kidnapped or anything like that, because, Dubai to me always felt safe in that sense, in that criminal aspect sense. But security in the sense that, when you looked around, you knew everybody. You kind of knew your neighbors. You knew your community. Everybody shared certain roles in your upbringing and in your care and in being neighborly, in a sense. So I felt happy. I felt that. I felt close to my community in the sense that you could knock on doors and the kids would come out and all you'd run to the beach. Those were primary emotions.
So I hear happy, closeness, connection, community, something like that.
Yeah.
And happy is pretty broad. Is it happy, like satisfied, happy, content, happy, fun? Could you be more specific?
I'd say content and fun. I was very happy with, and it wasn't a matter of rich or poor, but I was happy being able to play in my environment with my friends. I mean, all you had to do is give us a ball and we'd spend hours. So that was happy to me. I mean, there's no cares in the world. There was no frustrations. There was no worry. Everything was calm. Like I say, it was peaceful. It was quiet, and it was just and it was not as dense as it is today. You could not go to beaches today in many parts that I remember from my childhood, not just Dubai, and have that stretch of land to just enjoy and play and just have a good time. So those are
So
things that,
fun. I didn't hear free, but it sounded like free.
yes, of course.
And when you said that all we needed was a ball, or now
Mhm.
you didn't say the word fulfillment or fulfilled, but it sounds like there was like you had all you needed, like
Yes, yes, yes.
maybe
We
even in
did have
abundance.
all. Yes, of course, of course. I mean, I could tell you years later, just a few years later, abundance was rare for me because, oh, Dad, I need the new game console, whatever it was, or my other friends have cell phones, and things were starting to pop up, technology, and
Mhm.
you wanted it, you needed it, and branding started happening in a way that maybe it was, but I
You're
didn't
going down a
understand it.
path that's very tempting to go into of like
Yeah.
how let's leave that, let's
So,
table that for another
but
time.
all of that happened quickly,
Uh-huh.
and fulfillment never happened beyond after that started. But before that, fulfillment to me was exactly what you're saying. I mean, we didn't need much. We just needed the freedom, the space, and
Mhm.
a bunch of kids, and we'd resolve our problems. We'd have fun. We'd play for hours. Nothing was wrong.
All right. Now, based on these emotions that you felt, um, calm, peaceful, the happy of contentment,
Mhm.
of fun, of freedom, of fulfillment, I invite you, and this is if you want to, you don't have to do anything here, but if you want to think of something that you could do in your daily life today.
Mhm.
You don't have to do it forever. It's just you could do it once, you could do it many times. It's up to you to bring about those feelings. Because I put to you that I don't think you have to go there to the past to have those things. I think you can create them today. You say that it's harder to come by. So to think of something you could do to bring those feelings about. Now it could be one or more of them. It could be all of them. I mean, you won't be able to replicate exactly that situation with three constraints: something you're not already doing, something you do yourself. So no saying, okay, I'll get my kids to do it. Or, I mean, you can involve other people, but you have to be involved, and it can't depend on them, because if it's something that requires others and they don't do it, then you still have to do something. So something you're not already doing, something you do yourself, and something that has a physical component. So you can't just read a book or watch a documentary. And you have to have some feeling of, I left the world better than I found it. Now, I also want to clarify something I did not say, which virtually everyone hears. I'm not saying what's something you can do to help fix the environment. It is not to do fix the world. This is for you to bring about emotions that you sound like you really like having in your life.
Mhm.
Want to give it a shot?
You know what? I can tell you something that I don't do that I would like to do is many years later, and this was probably 2018, just a little before the pandemic. I was in Muscat in Oman, which is a neighbor state to the United Arab Emirates, and there was a stretch of sand, sea, uh, waterfront at the hotel I was at, and I went out for a walk. I went out for a stroll. And Muscat is not as developed in the sense of the tourism and the growth of Dubai. And it kind of reminds me of old Dubai when I go there. And I started walking along the beach and I saw children playing in the same way we were. And I started hearing the sounds again. And I started, remembering all these aspects of my childhood.
Mhm.
And I walked that day for almost, I remember it was a little over 2.5 hours up this entire beach and back, just
Wow.
remembering and getting, feeling one with the environment. And so I feel, and that's where I really got into a lot of the trekking because then I moved, and in the places I was, there were more mountainous regions than beaches, and so I started walking more because I felt that brought me peace in a sense. And one thing I could tell you is to go back on a tranquil beach, find a quiet beach and walk and just get back into that remembrance of it, of how it would be to feel that.
Okay, so walking along a beach today, channeling those things
Yes.
it looks like it would fit the bill. Now, let's make it a SMART goal. If you know the acronym: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, time bound. Are you near a beach now that you could do this?
Yes.
And so if you were to do this, actually, let me check one thing. If you were to do this, how many times would you have to do it over how long a period of time that if we met a second time and I said, how did it go, that you could give a meaningful answer?
Because of me doing this a couple of times actually in random places that had beaches that I could experience this in. I mean, I was during the pandemic, I was stuck in Europe for some time. And, in one of the spaces, again, there was a beach. And again, I went for a walk and I got these strong emotions again. And it helped me a lot with my thoughts. So a lot of the poetry I write, a lot of the music that I created came from these instances of the beach moments. So I would say every time that I have that, half hour to myself in that space, in that, solitude with the beach, I get creative.
So do I hear once is all we need, and then we could talk again after one time?
Yeah, for sure. I could, after one time, I could come back and say, I went out, I walked, and I took an hour and I came back, and here's the product of the creativity of that 1 hour.
And now it has to be a walk that you would not have done had we not had this conversation.
Yes.
So, and hopefully you will deliberately channel what you put in your mind and heart, these experiences from your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Then one last thing. Okay, so it's something you're doing yourself that you weren't already going to do. Is it leaving the world better than you found it?
I think the outcome of the practice and the exercise would, because the outcome would be channeling more of my thoughts.
Okay, that's yeah. People like to say, "Oh, if I make someone smile," you know what I mean by leave the world better than you found it.
Yes,
and it's not just changing something in the future. I mean, that you can look at the beach and say, "This beach is better than I found it," or something. Could you make it in some way part of the process that you leave things better than you found it?
It would be circumstantial. I mean, I could potentially clean up the beach, but it would have to be dirty for me to be able to clean it up. And if it wasn't dirty, then I wouldn't be leaving it better than I found it.
Let's see, what beach are you near right now, if you don't mind asking?
Well, it's
because if you're gonna say like LA, I'm gonna be like, there's gonna be litter on that beach.
Yeah, I know. No, but that's the thing. For me to go there, what I'm talking about is going to be a secluded beach, right? And generally those spaces that I find that way are not going to be very populated areas. And so it's kind of like, finding a wilderness and a beach that's tranquil. But it's in those spaces, it's hard to find enough people for it to be polluted, so to speak. But you know what I can do, and I'll guarantee you it will have that. I can clean up the algae, because there is always buildup, because this is the season where this happens at the end of
the
summer.
Algae problem? Is that like overgrown algae from like?
Yes, it's well, it's a little bit from the weather, and it's a little bit from the pollution that helps it grow. So what I could do is clean that up a little bit.
Okay, so then that satisfies the criteria. It sounds to me like you'll clean up litter if there is any.
Yes.
And algae if there isn't any litter, or maybe both.
Maybe both, but most likely there will not be litter, and most likely there will be algae. So
okay, I'm also guessing that you're not only going to go to the secluded beach, because I feel like if you're walking for hours and hours, you're going to pass from secluded to non-secluded.
Yes.
And people who are listening to this or watching this and thinking, well, that's no big difference. The difference between making it passively participating, and active, the tiniest little active changes a lot. It changes how you participate in it. And anyway, I'm getting into meta talk now. Going back into it, can we schedule another conversation for after you've done this at least once?
Okay.
Would that be a week from now or a month from now, or?
We can do a week from now.
Okay. Okay. This is one instance of the first part of the Spodek method.